So today, what we're trying to do is learn how some tools to be a clearer communicator. And being a clearer communicator is something that you're born with. I personally have to work quite hard with it. It's not easy. And at the end of this, if you know how to clearly articulate the impact of your work, a layperson, and I hate the word layperson, I usually use to your mother, your child, a supervisor or a funder, we've done a good job. And there's so much to learn about communication. We're touching a very small part of it. The ability to tell your story quickly is really a powerful tool. And I see a number, hundreds of business plans and pitches, and the ones that you actually stay awake through and you can focus on are the ones you understand. And I how about yourself, Janis? I mean, what's your opinion on being able to tell that quickly and understandably?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So that was actually, I was looking through the questions that you said. That was actually one of the things that really jump out as me is I find that when you articulate clearly from the beginning where the talk is going, what you're trying to explain to your audience, it really helps people to orient themselves and keep in mind the points that you want to talk about. As opposed to if you just drone on and on, then people might be like, where are we going with this? And by the time they figure out where you want to go with it, they've already forgotten all the great points that you already made.
Yeah, I actually, that's a very good point that forget what someone was trying to say because you got lost in the minutia. Uh, I see that happen every now and then. Rahul, what about yourself with the work you do with BC Chi? How does it impact you?
So, Clay, thanks for this question. And actually, I would start even from much earlier because, in around 2011, I had the privilege to work, on a large-scale applied research project funded by Genome Canada. And this was a very complex project focused on developing engineered microorganisms that can convert waste streams from forest operations into high-value products. And the cool part of this project is that it involved end users such as industry partners, government organizations, and as well as social scientists and economists. And you can imagine the communication among these people was really a disaster, because we were all speaking our own languages. I was a scientist, pure scientist at the time, didn't really know how to communicate with government folks or industry folks about the cool research, which I thought was cool. So that really prompted me to really, learn and evolve my communication skills, based on an end user perspective, especially if I'm working on applied and translational research, right? So since then, I started thinking, honing those skills, and I certainly was a great point in my career when I took that course as in the first cohort, to really understand and apply that in my current actually work at BCCI in previous work as well.
And for the audience, Rahul has mentioned the Eye program. You might hear that a few times. It's a program out of SFU's Beatty School of Business that runs across the country, and it's designed for scientists who have an innovation. We use the word innovation, but a piece of science that can have an impact on society, and they want to find a way to get it to people in a commercial way. And so that's what the Eye program is all about. So the agenda is today we've done our introductions, and we're going to be reviewing the why, what, how of a communication message. We're going to have the panel share their experience communicating science. And I would say that communicating their experience is going to happen throughout the presentation. It's not quite a bullet point. And hopefully you're going to get a good feeling of what has worked and what doesn't work. And like I said, it's just a taste of what this is. And I have my own story. I work with the Neuroscience Institute, and the director of the Neuroscience Institute, awesome guy, doing awesome work in dementia. And every time he does a presentation, people go, yeah, so what? How is this going to help me? And it's taken it. I literally spent 2 days constructing So What, and I finally got it. It's just he's working on an early warning system for people who have dementia, so they could better plan out what they have to do to slow the progress. And that literally took me 16 hours of research and using Chat GPT and uh, bouncing it off people to get something so simple. So this is not easy stuff. So lots of practice is included. Now, Janis, you went first last time, so I'll turn that over to Rahul. You know, I've just related a story about making something easy. Do you have a similar story that you've seen from people bringing you projects at BC Chi?
Yeah, I would say I have many examples now, like, when people come to me, especially like young entrepreneurs, like, they have very clear value proposition of what they want to really do. And often at times these would be like, scientists or postdoctoral fellows coming out of university, and they would actually bang on talk about the problem they are trying to solve. So they start with like, why the problem is critical and why they are, and how their solution is actually going to make a big impact, not just like from a research perspective, but like, from a societal perspective as well. And the example, like, maybe I will highlight is not from agri-tech sector, but from mining sector, like, which I have worked significantly as well. And there is a, very talented academic, actually a biological engineer whom I've worked with in the past, and very articulate in delivering scientific messages without using jargons and technical information. And this person's research focuses on bioremediation of tailing ponds, like, at mine sites. And how they start, like, pitching is that they start with a solution-centric approach, and they will highlight, like, and that what is the significant impact of, this tail pond, for example, on environment, and how, like, then they very clearly articulate like how their research solutions can make a big environmental and social impact. And this resonates very well with industry partners who basically have to co-invest, for example, with us in some cases. And this kind of approach, like, keeps all the stakeholders, partners engaged, and, also manages expectations if you are also including risk assessment analysis, and this person does that as well. So just providing that complete picture, like, not just focusing on my research or individual's research, but like, talking from an end-to-end perspective, and that kind of like approach, I'm seeing a lot coming out from universities these days.
Excellent. And for the audience, Rahul used the word value proposition and pitch, and some of you may not be familiar with that. Value proposition is really about what value your science brings to the person, to people. And while it's a word you might not use a lot, in your grant applications, the grantors are starting to ask for your value proposition. So it's something really good to learn. Now, Janis, I'll ask you the same question. You're in a CEO position. I knew you when you were a PhD postdoc position. How has your view on communication as a strategic tool changed during that time?
I'm not sure how much it has changed per se. I've always believed that communication is key to everything, including like at work, at home, meeting people at the bar, or even like on a more global scale. Communication is so key for getting things done effectively, having your needs met, understanding other people's needs, things like that. And we totally see that on a global scale as well in terms of like what we just went through in the pandemic, like how proper communication was really important for facilitating all of that, all the responses that we got. So, but I think from a more professional point of view, when I was a graduate student, even now I'm still struggling with often starting off with something very technical, starting with like the minute problem that I was trying to solve, and really assuming that people already are on board with like this very minute little problem that I am stuck on, without really thinking enough about like where people are coming from with their background and their understanding of my problems. So in my current role now with the company, I'm at a position where I am more in the center of trying to put all the puzzle pieces together, all the little minute pieces that I was working on during my PhD. Now I'm in the middle trying to get all these pieces to fit together. And I realized I need a lot of people's help to get me to help me put these pieces together. And these people often comes from very different backgrounds. That's why I need all these people to work together. And it became more and more apparent to me how I really have to explain properly to these people what end goal am I trying to achieve? Why am I trying to achieve that? And often they can give me a lot better solutions and give me better help and even want to help me because they understand what I'm trying to achieve. And our back and forth also helps me stay focused on what I'm trying to do, what my priorities should be. So it's a great tool on both sides.
It's a good answer, and I do want to emphasize again that good communication is not only about on the grant. It's what Janis mentioned now is about using it as a way to bring people together and collaborate. And it's a two-way tool. It's not you're just telling. You also have to be listening. And I know for a fact that Janis is a very good listener, and the people want to collaborate with her because she hears what they're saying and understands their needs of what they need to get a job done. And I've personally worked with Janis, and she's very good at that. Now, she won't admit it because she's also modest. So if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So we're trying to do this in a structured way because we can easily just talk among us for an hour and a half about this. So we're trying to bring some structure. So the first point we're going to make, excuse me, the first area we're going to work on is the why. And if there's one piece you're going to take out of this is learning or practicing being able to really state the purpose. So what these 3 points are really saying is that when you're talking to someone, when you're opening up your grant, you want to be able to have the person who's reading it relate to you emotionally. And what that means is purpose. I haven't heard a single scientist in my program, and I've taught 9 years, 10 years with this, say, I get up in the morning and I dream about making a lot of money. I've heard a lot of people say, I get up every morning and I dream about helping people get past Parkinson's, helping people grow more food, helping people, deal with Alzheimer's. And, my mom had diabetes, and I'm really driven to find ways to cure diabetes. And now whoever has someone whoever in the audience has a family member with diabetes is probably saying, yeah, me too. That's called the purpose. So on so emotionally connecting with your audience or listener is about triggering that emotion, building trust, and quantifying to emphasize the significance of the problem. Janis, can you tell the audience a story of when you were able to build trust by starting with the why and how you did it and the outcome?
Okay. So I have 2 parts. So part is like my own experience, but your question also made me think of like this ad that I really liked from when I was little. So yeah, so my personal experience is more, so right now we're building a tool for diagnosing Parkinson's disease, which they has talked about. And like as Clay said, like this is something that really resonates with people. And I cannot emphasize, I've lost count how many times I have given a talk about this or like this opening with, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is what we're working on. And people have come up to me and would tell me personal stories about their own family members who have struggled with this or similar disorders or their own fears and dreams. And they really want to see our task succeed because they see the value in it. And they want to do whatever they can to help that success. And that's great to have these people, to see the people who are interested and to have people like being there to support us. And also so my current biggest job right now is looking for input from doctors because we're hoping to we want our tool to be working with the doctor. So I'm looking for doctors to give me their insights on how they're treating patients. But doctors in Canada, they don't have a lot of time to just chat with random people. Like they're always busy. So by explaining to them what we're trying to achieve, so far people have been pretty receptive to talking to me, but they can only give me a very short amount of their time, like 20 to 30 minutes. And understanding my why, they could really fully utilize that time to make sure that they give me the information that they think I need to know, even if I forgot to ask the question or didn't know yet that I should be asking this question. They know what my end goal is supposed to be, and they would give me that time and give me that information. And so for my other thing about the building trust, so I don't know how many of you remember Clarica Insurance. They were bought out by Sun Life Insurance, I think in around 2000s. So Clarica stands for clarity. And they had a whole entire thing going on about their insurance brokers would like explain to you what their insurance is for. And one of my favorite commercial line that they had is for the Chinese TV channels. So their Chinese name was translated into clarity or understanding and trust. And so they had a whole entire line of commercials based on that. And one of my favorite was there was someone standing at a bus stop and suddenly they see the people across the street from them are doing this massive movement that looks like they might be trying to get them to move or like indicating wind or something. And that person is just looking at them like they're crazy. And at some point, someone drew an arrow pointing up. So the person looked up and they realized a piano was about to fall on them and they immediately jumped away just in time. So, and then like the commercial ends with like, with understanding, there is trust, and then like combined to the Clarica name. So I thought I saw that commercial when I was like early high school, and it was one of the ones that really stuck with me. Unfortunately, that company no longer exists, but
Well, I really like that understanding leads to trust, and there's hundreds of examples of that. But before I talk more, I want to turn it over to Rahul and ask him, how he feels about it, or if he has a good story about it.
So, like in my role where I get to manage public funds in Espando, so like I get to I look at why as like, okay, why should we invest, for example, and also I hear a lot of why from people who are seeking money from our center as well. So for me, like end benefits are a critical element in why. So since I focus primarily on applied and translational research, I like to see tangible benefits, as the outcome of a project. And I will give examples. For example, if my primary focus is on climate change mitigation and adaptation. And if someone is seeking funding from our center or we are considering an investment, like, we would like to see numbers such as how much carbon can be sequestered by applying a particular technology. So that gives us like, clear, then we can relate that to like, our core objectives of whether it's going to really make an impact on climate change, strategies or not. And then there could be other like areas like how many gallons of water we can save by applying a particular technology, or like how much energy can be saved, like so all these tangible benefits that can be articulated well like in the project helps us to really focus on justifying why we want to invest, for example, as well. And then there are several other metrics we look at, for example, number of highly qualified personnel that can be trained, like jobs created, because we look at economic impact from our investment as well, so that our stakeholders, our funders are also like happy and like and there are like benefits to society like from this work as well.
That's excellent. I'm glad you brought up the tangible benefits, and what you're saying is quantifiable as well, meaning that when you do that, when you say the why, it's, I don't know, many of us have heard people talk about the huge benefit from switching to a different energy source. What does huge mean? In fact, I just had a nightmare, believe it or not, about a survey that I was basing a decision on. And someone got the results of the survey and they said, you're basing all your decision, I literally had this last night, on 3 answers. And I'm like, wow, you're right, that's not quantifiable. And I was actually embarrassed in my own dream. So obviously I have something coming up, a decision that I need to do more work on. Keeping moving, if we can go to the next slide, so this, as a summary, you could see the notes here. What I'd like to ask is, for Janis, do you have what does it, like, layperson language mean to you in your role?
So yeah, so I guess you mentioned explaining what we do so that our mother or grandmothers or whoever would be able to understand. So for my research, that often comes down to replacing jargon with words that we usually use in daily life. So if I'm talking to a fellow neuroscientist, I might say I study saccades. So we use saccades to look at between patients and controls. For a lay audience, I might change that to eye movement because saccades is just one kind of eye movements, and talk about how we're using that to help diagnose Parkinson's disease. And also a part of it too is using examples that would be more relevant to our everyday experience, and choosing to start from something that's more broad, so that they can understand where the scope is of what I'm working on, and then gauging from their interest whether or not to go deeper into the details of what I'm doing.
I do like the jargon. It's often cultural. I mean, I find that I use jargon that I understand because of where I come from, who I am, and my education level. And I realize some people don't understand it at all, and they're too embarrassed to ask, which does not build understanding and trust. How about yourself, Rahul? What does that mean to you?
So for me, I see that, audience is, of course, the most critical part of communication. And for me, they must understand and relate to the why that we are talking. Otherwise, they will not be excited. So, I have worked, for example, in my past life on a very cool science projects, characterizing different types of proteins with different functions. But unless I can really talk to a end user and tell them how that, let's say, enzyme can really, change the world or the area they work in, and create some tangible benefits again, they will not get excited. So I try to find approaches that I can relate, whatever work I'm doing with that particular audience. And that's how, I create excitement for them as well.
Nice. The getting the audience excited is important, and certainly with enzymes, it's hard. But I have seen people do that, and it's amazing when you come out thinking you know everything about enzymes because you listen to person for 5 minutes. That's a gift. If we can move on, Ben. So for the people at home, if you want to take a screenshot of this will allow you to practice your why. And the reason we have it in 30 seconds or less is because I don't truly believe anyone wants to listen to me for more than 30 seconds. My wife doesn't, my kids don't, and I know Rahul's tired of listening to me for 45 seconds at a time. So it's important as well to aim for a grade 7 level of writing. That doesn't mean dumbing it down. That means making sure sentences are short, to the point. I do love ChatGPT now. I just take my whole paragraph, I drop it in ChatGPT, and I say, make it simpler. and ChatGPT does a great job at it. But Hemingway also does a very good job. All right, so now we're into the what. What often gets really, really stuck in the mud. You know, people get down into, and you know you're there when you're doodling on your pad or daydreaming. And at the risk of being repetitive, the what depends on your audience. You know, so thinking about it as a label, you know, there's a description of what you want to see on, how is it used, who might use it, what benefit does, and it should be understandable by the average person. And Janis, I hope you got my question for this ahead of time. So I'm going to ask you if you give a what example.
So you just want me to tell you about what we're working on, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So our company is called Dynamis. It stands for Dynamic Iris. We're working on a fast and easy to use tool to help doctors diagnose brain disorders, for example, Parkinson's disease, using eye tracking.
Well, that was pretty good. So what I got out of that, and it's an eye tracking tool. It's for doctors, and then it went so quickly, I missed part of it. But me written
Fast and easy to use tool.
And easy to use. So pretty good. Thank you. And it was in probably 20 seconds. How about yourself, Rahul?
So we provide research funding for product development in agri-tech space.
Well, that's pretty research funding for agriculture. Pretty simple. Good what, right? So these are examples, and you know that both Rahul and Janis have practiced them quite every day. So it wasn't much effort. But where would you use this what, Rahul?
So, you know, I think especially the advantage I would say with me is that since my work involves giving money to SMEs, so that certainly attracts, you know, my audience. Okay, there's money available as long as they can be a recipient for developing their technology. And then we get into, like, you know, more details, and so that's the anchor for us. And then we, you know, understand about what their needs are, and then whether our parameters fit, like, you know, with their needs, and then what kind of support they need. So, and then we begin this communication, like, you know, conversation, and then we get to, like, you know, we don't really focus, for example, at the very beginning on the technology side. Like, you know, we start from benefit again, and then, you know, come back to where the technology is, if it's mature enough, for example, to get our services or not. And in the process, like, you know, we sell our services as well, because end of the day, like, my belief, or the way I see life, is we always are selling. Like right now, I'm trying to sell how I can communicate, right? So yeah, we try to incorporate those practices in our conversations with the company that we work with.
So for the people in the audience, if you have questions, please send them along, and there is a moderator, because we are going to leave a few minutes for questions. And I do want to touch on another point that Rahul made about he's always selling. There's a lot of people who are listening who will say, I hate selling, I hate salespeople, I hate everything marketing. But the truth is, why we communicate is so that we establish a connection with people, a connection with people who we can relate to. And essentially that we're always doing that. We're doing it again with our supervisors. We're doing it on a grant. We're doing it with you're doing it from the time you're a child to try to get that bicycle. So if you hate the word selling, call it relationship building. And what we're always doing is relationship building. And this is an important tool. So Janis, now that I've probably totally disrupted what you wanted to say, how do you feel about this?
About how I use my what, or
That's
what?
right. How you use your what?
Yeah. So this is sort of my go-to opening that I've been using recently. So it's a great way to start a talk when I'm talking about the work that we're doing. It gives a quick summary. So as I was mentioning before, I like to orient people to where I am going with this, with my conversation. And so there's a great summary to tell them, okay, we're going to be talking about Parkinson's disease, some kind of fast diagnosis, and eye tracking. And then from there on, we can talk about like more details about like what is the problem we're trying to solve and how exactly we're solving it. And even introducing myself in either scientific meetings or business meetings, or just when I'm out in a social gathering and people ask me, oh, what do you do? Like, this is one of the first things that I can come up with that quickly describes what I do. And then from that, I can gauge, well, what interests them. Do they want to change the subject? Are they interested in the eye tracking part? Are they interested in the Parkinson's part? Are they like, which part are they interested in? And I can continue going forward with that.
That's a good answer. And what do you do is a question that you're going to get asked all the time. You know, I was at a dinner last night and someone said, what do you do? And they don't really want to listen to me for 2 minutes. They want 15 seconds. And I have to say what I do in 15 seconds. And, you know, and they have to understand what I do as well if I'm going to keep the conversation going. Good answer. So let's move on, Ben. So this is a summary for this. It's descriptive and it's easy to understand. Again, very repetitive around who is your audience, and benefits are clear as the research relates to your audience. Again, we're so repetitive an audience because if you're not remembering who you're talking to, you'll either be too above or too below. And you know when you're too below because people are also tuning out. They don't want to hear the simple stuff. And we should always be trying to research your audience a little bit. Even if you're going to be writing a grant, I try to research who the funder is and what they want to hear and how they want to hear it. I don't know, in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask us to move to the next slide. So, of course, there's a summary sheet. And again, practice 15 seconds. There's always a time limit. So the better you can do at stating your what, and the quicker you can do it in a clear way, the more successful you'll be when you're on those grants, when you're talking to people. You'll have people being curious about wanting more information. And that's what we're trying to do, is to draw people in. So I keep talking about time limits, and I want to ask Janis if she's ever came across time limits as a big issue when she's telling people her what.
I think time limits is a thing that we're pretty used to both in like research science and elsewhere. So like most talks, people would give you a time limit that you have to stick to. And I feel like, especially now that I'm more in the business side, I feel like a lot of the time limits are a lot more aggressive. So I just did one that was 3 minutes. And it was actually a pretty good event. So we all gave our 3 minutes talk, and then there was time for networking afterwards. And this 3 minutes I really had to use well to introduce myself, like what we're working on, what kind of people we would love to talk with, so that during the networking session, like we can quickly find the people that we want to talk to. So that's definitely been very helpful. And even in more organic ways of meeting people, as they was just talking about, like people, you meet someone and then people ask you, what do you do? And they don't want a 2-hour explanation of what you, or they might want a 2-hour, but they don't know yet if they want a 2-hour. You have to give them your 15-second like summary, and then we'll see from there whether or not it turns into a 2-hour discussion. And also having that quick summary makes it more of a interesting discussion, so that they can ask questions and then you can feed on that and you can feed on each other, as opposed to just you talking at that person for 2 hours and they're just looking for an excuse to walk away and to meet it.
I call it chewing off my arm to escape. How about yourself, Rahul? Where have you seen time limits come to bear?
I think time limits are very critical, and yeah, it depends on audience, right? So in my role, like, I have, for example, if I work with a researcher, like, with principal investigator or supervisor, you can talk about all details of the experiments, like, whether it replicates or not and all the data and whatnot. But think about, like, policymakers or ministers, for example, who have to make major decisions on funding. They get, like, maybe 30 seconds or like a minute or two, like, just for their staff to brief them on the significance. So we get to, like, deal with all kind of people. So for government organizations in particular, they need very high level, very targeted and very specific details that can help them to make a major decision. For example, industry partners, like, with us, like, they need different types of deals, but their like time is certainly bit more than what we get from government, but, like, still very focused. Time is money for them. And when we are working with researchers, like, then you can certainly spend more time understanding about their details in the research. So my advice or my point here would be that, like, understand your audience, what they need and what you want to get out from them, and then tailor, like, your pitch or, like, your presentation based on that.
Perfect. It's really important to understand your audience and where they get their information. It's not trivial, especially in a grant when you're trying to get a point across, is that, how you're going to answer depends on who you're talking to. And the how things work is it helps set you aside from we all compete against someone else, but it also helps you explain your science in context of other science. And the only example I have is, again, from the Neuroscience Institute, there are people who do data science and there are people who do neuroscience. And what we do, how we do this, is we combine neuroscience and data science to come up with virtual models. And that's what makes us different. It's a really understandable how. So could we go to the next slide, Ben? And so with this in mind, I want to ask, I'm choosing from my questions here. Rahul, can you talk about a time that you used a story or a visualization to engage an audience in a big way and the outcome?
Yeah, I think that is something I would say I started with, like, yeah, putting a lot of data on slides, and, like, you get excited and carried away with that just because you're so focused and, associated with that science. But nowadays, like, my approach is to convert data into visual aspects, like, and make sure the audience can relate to that, because most of the times I'm speaking to audience, or my audience is not really scientists, but I have to convey, like, a lot of scientific information and value of science, for example, and also the value that even I don't understand fully, because now I work with all kind of, like, researchers and scientists. So try to find, like, a way that can be relatable for, like, the audience. And my approach is to convert, like, a data into, like, infographic. I'm a big fan of infographics. In fact, I work with infographics and explain to them different complex projects that we work on that can be summarized in just one figure, and they are really great at that. So it's always good to have, like, your infographic as your contact, like, especially in my field.
Nice. How about yourself, Janis?
So working on storytelling is still something that I'm still struggling with, to be honest. But what I have found useful is giving people concrete examples. So, well, for example, when I'm explaining about the brain area that I'm researching, giving them very concrete examples of, for example, when you look here, what are you doing? Like, think about what your eyes are doing, and then going on to explain about, like, what about that we're looking for. A lot of people ask me, well, why is eye tracking used for detecting Parkinson's? What makes you think it'll work? And going into examples of, like, for example, when you're trying to stop yourself from looking at something, this is what is happening. So explaining it in more relatable ways, as Rahul was saying, has been helpful for me.
Those are good points. The as well as when anyone out there doing slides or PowerPoints, remember how a brain works, and we read left to right, top to bottom, bigger things first. Color grabs your attention. So if you're trying to get a point across, and your slide has lots of different graphics and images, it's all good, but you're actually confusing people visually, which they won't even hear your message clearly if their brain is trying to figure out your slide. So let's go to the next slide, Ben.
If I may make
Sure.
another point, there is a lot of neuroscience that is involved in this, like, and Janice must know more about it, but like, data brings a lot of cognitive load on an audience, and by infographics, you can really release that. And that there's scientific evidence, I think, to prove that if you have less, like, more infographics and like that kind of approach, it helps to deliver a message very effectively. Thanks.
Thank you for emphasizing that. In fact, I had a CEO showing his funders what he's done to reduce churn and the impact. And it was 2 hockey sticks in parallel. And there was like a 1 centimeter gap. And he couldn't understand why the funders didn't see what he saw. And there was nothing they could do to convince him that his graph made no sense. So it was a pretty funny exchange. So another worksheet. This is a chance for you to just say what makes your science different than what's out there. And it's just a way for people are going to always ask you, like I would say to Janis, well, there's a lot of tools for, for diagnosing Parkinson's. Why is yours different? And she could probably, please don't answer, we don't have time. But I know Janis could do that in 2 seconds. So let's go to the next slide. All right, so we've sped up quite a bit because I also want a chance for people in the audience to be able to ask questions, and I do hope that there's some questions there. So good communications is important, and I have an example that I want to use. I was working with an SFU lawyer, and this is not a communication like slides. I thought I mansplained a topic to the legal counsel for the university. And then I realized I'm mansplained something that this person knows so much more than I do. I have to be aware, and I wrote her an email and apologized for it. And that being self-aware is a big part of communications, and reading your audience and knowing when maybe you've insulted somebody, maybe they're afraid to ask a question. It's a big part of being an effective communicator. And Janis, do you have a similar story that you might be able to share like that, where really touching on two-way communication that's empathetic?
I have to think a little about that, sorry.
All right, I'll go to Rahul.
I think I have had several stories, and where I always reflect back, after having a conversation, and just like you, in between you highlighted, Clay, that words matter, right? So I use the word sales, for example, and then you use relationship building, and you see that the impact of the 2 words is so different. So, I mean, I would not point any other example, but I would just highlight that words do matter a lot. And and it's an evolving process. So no conversation is perfect. You continue to evolve, you can always do better. And that's what approach I take. So I reflect on how I said, how I delivered my message. Even if I got intended result or not, there's always room for improving it and making it much more succinct, much more efficient. So that's the approach I take. And certainly I have had disastrous conversations to great ones as well.
Yes, Rahul and I have had a number of conversations where we try to be empathetic with each other. Rahul and I work daily together. So, and here's something else that you know, so we have our little private jokes and no one else understands them. And I have to be aware of that. So I think it's very funny, but no one else will. And humor is subjective and cultural and situational. So be careful with your humor. Janis, can you add any? And you don't have to add a point, Janis, because we do have we have other questions for you.
Yeah, I think you guys already made very great points, and
Okay.
like for my experience, it was more like related to like personal life. Like that humor point that you made is so great. Like, yeah, a lot of times that we often forget what our audience don't know because we assume they know everything that we know, and that would translate into a lot of misunderstanding if we don't take that into account.
It's a really good point. And we use our eyes to determine who somebody is. And I could honestly tell you, you can't decide who someone is by looking at them. You have no idea. You have no idea how smart they are, how aware they are, who they are. And it's a dangerous thing to come to quick conclusions about people or your audience based on what you see.
And it never hurts to ask them where they're from or like how to start. So even when I was doing my scientific talks at scientific conferences, I would often ask them a little about their background. How much do you know about eye movements? How much do you know about what I'm studying? And start from there.
Excellent point. Could we go to the next slide there, Ben? All right, so it's the end slide. And, you know, there's some important points that we didn't get to make about amplifying your research, you know, to magnify the influence on policymakers or extend the reach of what you're doing, and the importance of communication and collaboration and helping people make decisions. But what I'd like to do very quickly is, Rahul, what's been influential in your journey to becoming a good communicator?
I think I mentioned in the very beginning that I2I, or Invention to Innovation program, at the time it used to be called Graduate Certificate in Science and Technology Commercialization. To me, that was quite transformational. And I'm not saying because, like, you know, Clay, you are here, or this is sponsored, maybe this event is hosted by I2I, but I really learned like how I can, like, you know, create significant value out of the research I was doing. And that helped me to think differently, and, like, you know, how I can be more solution centric, how I can think about benefits, like, you know, from coming from publicly funded research. And, like, you know, there, it doesn't exclude discovery research. For example, discovery is very much needed, like essential for our society, but how you can derive value further from that discovery into applied and translational space. And like, you know, that certainly was quite instrumental when I went through this course. But in addition to that, I also say I took like a mini MBA at UBC, plus I continue to read a lot, like, you know, about how to continuously evolve and improve communication skills, and how to, especially, like, you know, bring complex subjects to audience like that cannot understand. So that's an evolving process.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think for me, the most useful thing is practicing and having a good support network that you can talk to, you can practice with, especially if you can develop that culture of honesty so that they can tell you that what you need to change, what they didn't understand. So our lab has been very supportive, and we'll present, if we have a big presentation coming up, we will present to the lab and people will just hack it to bits. So if you generate that kind of support network, especially with diverse people with diverse backgrounds, so you can get the perspective of people that you might have to go out and talk to. So our lab is often all scientists, so they might have one perspective, but someone from another lab might have a different perspective because they're not as intimately familiar with what you do. So they would see a gap in your explanation that no one else would see. And you can start anticipating some of the questions that people might ask you, and be able to be better prepared for it.
Great point. And I see Diana up here, so that either means we're done or there's a question, or So Diana, you are a great communicator. What would you like to add something?
Well, I've found this very confirmatory in terms of the things that we're training our researchers and our students on, practices, processes, strategies. So I really appreciate the comments that you've raised today. The last point Janis made, I think, is a really part of the fabric of our process around communications, and that is what we call formative feedback. So Janis, you talked about presenting to your lab and then having them hack it to pieces and give you feedback. It really requires that relationship building. It requires trust to be in place, and it requires people to be humble and to know that identifying areas of weakness in terms of a collegial setting is just part of a process to make everyone successful. And it's such a learning process. One of the things that I stress with my own staff is there are so many role models for communications around us, and you can learn so much by watching other people communicate and seeing what they do well and emulating that, and seeing something that really strikes you as off-putting and say, gee, I want to make a note that I don't do that. So it's an ongoing refining process. You have to be a sort of a continuous learner, but to make a conscious commitment to effective communications in science and in your life, in your relationships with everyone you meet, whether it's professional or personal, I think it's a critically important skill. And I think all of us can always improve. And we really appreciate the comments and the suggestions and the strategies you've shared with us today. And it's been really incredible. And I think all of you have done a great job of role modeling excellent communications for us today. So thank you very much.
And I want to, if anyone's interested in bringing some of this into their science, I really encourage you to look at the Eye to Eye program. 9 years of doing this, it's really quite remarkable how people mindset change and how much better they get at it. So it's, taking courses is an important part of keeping that education up and keep increasing your skills.
And I think the Eye-to-Eye program was very important for me too, in terms of building that network of people who know my science, people who are scientists but don't know my science, people who are more business oriented, so that I can really get a good scope of different kinds of audience, how to communicate with them.
Well, I will just I'll conclude where Clay began, and that is, it's very important to practice this and consider it a personal practice and developing your communication skills. So again, thank you very much for joining us.